Welcome to the first episode of Shielded Voices, the podcast that primarily amplifies the often unheard experiences of first responders. However, I will be open to other topics in the future. I'm excited for that. I'm Mitch. I've been involved in law enforcement for half of my life. I began as a police cadet when I was 15 years old. When I aged out of the program, I was offered a reserve police officer position within the same city. Put in a year of volunteer time and was offered a position as a full-time deputy with the sheriff's office located on the West Coast. I have 8.5 years of experience with my current agency, so I've been through a lot of trauma. Like I said, half of my life. I've never really got to grow up as a kid. I saw the worst in people. I saw death, destruction, all of that. That's what we're going to get into. So that's a brief introduction about myself. Considering this is my first podcast, I guess I should tell you I aim to provide insight on topics revolving around first responders, family life, pros and cons of being a first responder, and the changes that have been made throughout my career, whether it's for better or for worse, and my own life experiences. However, a topic that's been weighing heavy on my mind has been PTSD, and today we're discussing that vital topic. Trauma and PTSD in first responders and how to support them, whether you're going through it or a loved one is. First responders, whether they're firefighters, paramedics, police officers, dispatchers, or other emergency personnel, carry the weight of intense situations. They are true heroes, but they're also human, and their exposure to traumatic events can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder. We're going to explore what PTSD looks like, strategies for coping and healing, resources available for first responders and their loved ones, and we'll also go into detail about some personal traumatic events I've been through and how I'm learning to cope with them. So let's dive in. So to start, let's define PTSD. It is a mental health condition triggered by seeing or experiencing a traumatic event, and especially for first responders, these events are an unavoidable part of the job. That's what we signed up to do. I mean, be it a life-threatening fire, fatal crash, violent crimes, child abuse, or domestic violence calls. There are also so many other types of calls that we can discuss, and some may come up through conversation. Research shows that PTSD affects first responders at rates significantly higher than the general population. I think I read somewhere that we experience 3 times or more than the normal human does when it comes to a traumatic event. As far as symptoms, it might include flashbacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors, emotional numbness. I recently experienced a couple nights ago a night terror, or I wouldn't say it was a flashback because it was never a situation I've ever been in, but it was a situation I've always been afraid of. And that was a gunfight, and I remember getting shot in the head during this night terror, and it jolted me awake, and I was gasping for air, and I was wide awake, even though I'd been sleeping pretty heavily. Hypervigilance, yeah, that's a constant state that we live in when we're at work. Oftentimes when I come home, I can relieve some of that stress, and my home is my castle. I preach this to everyone. When I come home, I am no longer in a state of fight or flight. When I'm at work, it's a constant state of fight or flight. Avoidance behaviors, I avoid certain routes when I'm driving and I'm not at work because I can look at a house and remember a certain call or a certain traumatic event that I've responded to at that house or a certain street or a certain shopping mall. Avoidance behaviors, I avoid malls because there's a lot of people. We train active shooters. Just stuff like that. Emotional numbness. There have been times where I just said, fuck everyone. It's just myself. I'm here to look out for myself. I don't care what other people think. Yeah. The nightmares and hypervigilance, constant state of fight or flight is definitely a reaction to PTSD or a response to PTSD. But this burden does not just affect the responder. It ripples into their family, friendships, and overall well-being. Left untreated, PTSD can lead to depression, substance abuse, even suicidal thoughts. I've been diagnosed anxiety depression, ADHD. I've had issues with substance abuse, and I've definitely had suicidal thoughts. In my own personal experience with PTSD, including these thoughts of suicide, I noticed something was wrong and I reached out for help. And since then, I've been diagnosed with all of these things, and my journey has only begun. I find myself that I often share my stories with other people that I work with, and there's a certain look on their eyes, as if they're experiencing what I've explained to them in regards to my own experiences, but they're just not ready to share their story or begin their journey into their own recovery, which is unfortunate, but I give them that space. And don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect. I still experience certain episodes, strong emotions, and my mind may even go into catastrophe mode where I feel the entire world around me is collapsing or falling. There is hope, and awareness is the first step. Reaching out for help is not a sign of weakness. I hope as you listen to this and my story, you can have the courage to reach out. When the trauma begins to flow over the wall of protection that you may have built up. And for me, my traumas began to spill over, and it led me into a dark place. So this is segment 2, and it's called Coping Strategies for First Responders. We could talk about coping strategies, although while PTSD is complex, there are tools and practices, I guess, to help manage it. Number 1, being peer support groups. One of the most effective ways to cope is by talking, at least for me, with others who understand what you're going through. And peer support groups, like those offered by organizations such as First Responders First, they provide a safe space to share experiences and stories, traumatic events. I personally reached out to several crisis lines that are specific for first responders. It helps me keep my mind busy, and usually the person on the other end of the phone is generally good at redirecting my negative thoughts. If you're looking for those specific first responder support groups, you can reach out to me and I'll provide those. Or towards the end of this podcast, I'll share some of those and the numbers. The other one is professional therapy. And just as a disclosure, I'm not a therapist, although it feels like I am at work dealing with other people's issues. Therapies like EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, have proven effective for PTSD, and many first responders find these approaches. They help reframe traumatic memories. I've been going through therapy for the last 6 or so months and have taken part in EMDR. I was skeptical at first, but I wanted to go into it with an open mind because I felt like if I wasn't open about it, it was not going to be effective. I've heard numerous stories from other deputies experiencing EMDR and how it affects them and how it's been for them. And they it's sure you have this negative memory or this negative, or I guess traumatic experience, but the emotions don't follow. It still may be a visualization that you have in your head, but those emotions don't follow with it. I found that the more I spent in this career, the more I started putting myself in other people's shoes. Like a suicide with a 16-year-old boy because his girlfriend broke up with him. I remember putting myself in the shoes of the father when he had just realized that his son shot himself in the head right in front of his mother. I really got emotional with that because I put myself into that father's shoes. And as a parent, that made it extremely difficult for me and brought up a lot of emotions and something that I just need to disassociate myself from. My experiences with EMDR, they're not necessarily traumatic. However, they opened a lot of opportunities for emotions to arise and revisit those traumatic events. If you're not sure about it, the therapist I see, so you hold 2 stone-shaped devices in your hands, and they vibrate back and forth, left and right, and they stimulate your mind while you either close your eyes or you focus on something in the room. As I closed my eyes and focused on a core memory or a negative incident, it would often lead me to another negative event or traumatic event. and I either had visions or thoughts about something that clearly affected me. And then the therapist set a certain time to experience these thoughts or visions and then would stop the vibrations. At the end of that short session, she would tell me to take a deep breath and then ask me what came up. I would tell her what my thoughts or visions I had, and then she would tell me to focus on that thought, and then she'd start again. A few times I found my mind was just blank. And I was afraid to tell my therapist that I didn't envision or think about anything. And she reassured me that there was no wrong answer as to what my brain was doing during this reprocessing. The other thing is mindfulness and stress management. Techniques like deep breathing, meditation, yoga can help reduce hypervigilance and anxiety. Apps like Headspace or Calm have specific programs tailored for high-stress professions. A few of these apps I use are more geared towards EMDR, such as WeMind, CID, and EMDR tappers, which mimic the feelings of the vibrations through your phone while following a stimuli that moves across your phone screen. I've also used Rooted, which has helped with my anxiety. This app provides words of affirmation and allows you to journal, breathe, visualize. I've used this app often when I feel myself entering into an episode. I feel more stimulation with the EMDR apps or just sitting in a dark room with silence. My agency has been gracious enough to provide us with an hour and a half of wellness time while we work on duty as uninterrupted time. It provides us time to work out, attend a psychology appointment, or do whatever we want, as long as you can justify your time as mental health. I can't stress this enough, but your time to yourself, no matter what is going on around you, is an important factor for healing. Another one is exercise and nutrition. Regular physical activity and a balanced diet are vital for maintaining overall mental health. Endorphins from exercise help counteract stress hormones and may help us maintain homeostasis, which is the dynamic balance or steady state involving levels of salts, water, sugars, and other materials in the body's fluids. I'll be the first to admit that while I'm preaching this, I'm the worst at it. Between trying to balance work life and home life, I rarely find time to myself, especially with two toddlers. But I consider chasing my two toddlers around as a workout, as the small feats that matter, no pun intended. But even a simple walk around the neighborhood helps clear the mind. And you add that with fresh air, and it may help change your mindset in the moment. It's not going to be a permanent fix. Another one is setting healthy boundaries. Creating separation between work and home life can prevent the job from consuming every aspect of your identity. And establishing boundaries with technology, like not checking work emails after hours, can also help. I'm also terrible at that. I think having a healthy disconnect also affects our mental health. I had mentioned earlier that I consider my home my castle. When I'm inside of it, I'm safe. I don't think about work. I don't think about someone killing me or my family. But what I do think about is letting my guard down and being a true human, a father, and a husband. My job doesn't define who I am. My character does. Fortunately, we see too many new cops feeding into the thin blue line, and that's all they know. That's what defines them. I'm not like that. So if you're a cop anywhere under 5 years, please don't let this job define you. You're a human. We can go into that deeper in future episodes. All right, so let's go into talking about supporting loved ones with PTSD. I kind of intermix this between my own thoughts and trying to balance what our loved ones or our partners think. PTSD doesn't just affect the first responder, it impacts their loved ones too. Hell, it impacts anyone that may feel they have experienced something traumatic. Families often struggle to understand the changes they see. Here's how you can support someone with PTSD. This is the catch-all. It's just things that I've put together that I feel have helped me. First off is educating yourself or having your spouse educate themselves about the symptoms and effects of PTSD. There are numerous books that break down the chemistry in our brains when it comes to PTSD. There are books out there that are for spouses who may not understand what PTSD is doing to their partners. There have been plenty of times where I look at my wife and for some unexplained reason I just break down. I'm not afraid to say that now, but our brains are very complex computers. We don't need to understand why we feel this way. We just need to acknowledge that something's not right in the moment. And we as cops don't need to investigate this feeling. I know we want answers, but our brains won't let us in the moment of that episode or a episode. I know I may have been focused on this topic on us when it should be geared more towards our loved ones. I understand that. But having an open and honest discussion with your loved one about how you feel will make a difference. They may not understand, but not being open with them, especially me not being open with my wife about how I felt in the past, has bit me in the ass. So just be open, no matter how hard it might be. Don't shield your voice. Just let it be heard. I think as a partner, you need to practice patience. And getting back onto the topic of understanding PTSD in our loved ones, for those who may be spouses or partners, the recovery is a long road. Your loved one may have good days and bad days, but just avoid pushing them to talk when they're not ready. Avoid saying, I understand, because honestly, we can't understand someone else's trauma unless we've walked in their shoes. I hate it when someone tells me that they understand because they haven't been through what I have. If you see your partner crying, offer a simple hug or simply ask what you can do for them in that moment. These emotions can be extremely difficult at times. There have been several times where I've asked my wife for a simple hug when normally I would just grab her and hug her. She knows when I ask for a hug something's wrong or may be experiencing an episode. One thing she and I talked about in therapy was that if I were to ask her for a hug, it indicates I had a hard day. Our therapist asked me what she thought my wife should say or do after this. I broke down in layman's terms and asked her to simply ask me if it was a depression day, an anxiety day, or a PTSD day. Whatever I responded after that, I wanted her to ask me on a scale 1 to 10 how bad my episode was. If it was anything above 5, I told her I wanted to talk to me about it after kids went to bed. There have also been days where I may not want to talk about what kind of day it was. I simply wanted her to know that it was a 7 or an 8 today. And that shows her that I may not have the energy to talk about it, but that I was experiencing some emotion and simply needed someone to hear what happened. I encourage you to have these conversations with your loved ones and come up with something. There will be days you might experience certain emotions, but you don't have the energy to deal with them. And having that partner understand this and be there for you, it's going to help you with your episode. Quick little short topics. Encouraging professional help, but as a spouse, it might be hard. It might be hard for us as first responders to hear you need therapy. But I would recommend you gently suggest that they seek therapy and offer help to find those resources. If they're hesitant, consider family therapy to bridge the understanding. With first responders, it can go one of two ways. Either we need someone to tell us flat out to go to therapy, or it takes someone to schedule something which forces us to go, similar to getting a subpoena for court. I also recommend setting boundaries. So supporting someone with PTSD can be emotionally exhausting, and it's okay to set limits to protect your own mental health. It's been something I've been experiencing with my own relationship. I lean on my wife a lot. I know it can be taxing on her. Just don't get mad if your partner wants to take a day trip to a hotel just to be by themselves in silence. I know it may not work out well for you if you're going through an episode, but lean on your support group if you have one. If not, reach out to a crisis line of friends that you know you can dump trauma onto. As a spouse, be a listening ear. Sometimes they just need someone to listen without judgment, or someone that will listen and just be silent. So it's also important for loved ones to find support too, not for the first responder, but for our partners, for our loved ones. Organizations like National Alliance on Mental Illness and Code Green campaign offer resources for family members. If you know someone that is a first responder dealing with PTSD, there's some resources that you can start with, such as First Responder Support Network. They offer retreats, peer support for first responders and their families. The SAM HSA Disaster Distress Helpline. It's 1-800-985-5990. It's a free confidential resource. Obviously, you have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. All you have to do is dial 988. But I know for first responders that can be difficult for us. We want something that's catered more towards first responders rather than a random mental health clinician showing up to our house with maybe a partner or a district partner that you know. So that's why I've used Safe Call Now. It's one of those numbers where whoever answers the other end of the line, they are a first responder or retired first responder. And it's been amazing help for me. That number is 206-459-3020. And for family members, Blue Help, HELP. It's the National Center for PTSD, and Safe Call Now. They provide tools and education tailored for loved ones. Just remember, trauma doesn't define you. Courage to seek help is a testament to your strength. It's not a sign of weakness. Healing is possible, but it starts with the conversation, just like what I'm doing here, what I'm doing now. It might sound geeky, might sound quirky, might sound like a terrible fucking podcast, but I'm starting somewhere. So thank you for joining me on this episode of Shielded Voices. If you found this episode helpful, share it with someone who might benefit from it. So stay safe, take care of yourself. We'll see you next time.